Previously on The Secret Sits, we have begun exploring the lives of the Knotek sisters, Tori, Nikki, and Sami, and the control their mother asserted over every aspect of their lives. Sami is now at home with her mother and scared that someone will find out about Kathy. And that is where we find ourselves while we pick up our story today. Welcome to The Secret Sits. I'm your host, John Dodson. Join us every Thursday as we uncover the secrets behind the world's most fascinating true crime cases. You can find all episodes of The Secret Sits for free on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you are hearing, reach out to us on Instagram and Facebook at TheSecretSitsPodcast, or on Twitter at TheSecretSitsPod. Now, on with our story. Tori was 12 years old now, and she took in everything. Every single thing. Ron was no longer allowed the luxury of clothes. He worked outside from 7:30 a.m. until 8 p.m. on the exhaustive list of chores that Shelley gave him. At night, Ron would eat his dinner upstairs alone. On most nights, Shelley would give him a couple of sleeping pills, and despite there being an empty bedroom and bed in the house, Ron slept on the floor. Tori would occasionally stand up for Ron and ask her mother why she was being so cruel to him, telling her mother that Ron was a nice guy. Shelley's response was, "Well, if you like him so much, why don't you marry him?" Not long after this encounter, Shelley called Tori down to the living room. Ron stood there for the longest time before he finally spoke. "I don't love you anymore, Tori," he said. Tears welled up in Tori's eyes, and she told him that she did not believe him. But in typical Shelley fashion, she instructed Ron that he was no longer allowed to speak to Tori anytime after this. The two honored Shelley's demands because they both knew the consequences if they chose to disobey her. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house was quiet as a cemetery, Tori would tiptoe from her bed to the space where Ron slept on the floor, and she would silently bend down and give him a quick hug. He would nod back at her with a small smile. Sami had noticed a decline in Ron's health when she was home from school, and when Nikki learned that her mother had a male friend living at the house, she called her mom and left a pointed voicemail. "I know there is a man living there, and you need to get him out of the house before history repeats itself." Shelley called her back right away and explained to Nikki that he was a family friend and that he was really good with Tori, and nothing was going on. Sami also backed up what her mother said about Ron. "Everything is fine," she said. "I keep asking Tori. She's fine. She's so much mouthier than we were. She would tell us." Sami did mention that Ron wasn't wearing any shoes, which she found strange. But Nikki just thought, "Oh crap, something is happening." And David Knotek knew it too. He said when he came home from work, Ron would be down in the swamp with a weed whacker and no shoes, all cut up. And he watched as Shelley would make Ron slap himself over and over. When he suggested to Shelley that they buy Ron a pair of shoes, Shelley said, "What for? He keeps losing them," which Dave knew was just not true. Ron tried running away from Shelley several times through the years, just like Kathy, just like Shane. But Shelley always found him and brought him back. No matter where Ron was on the Knotek property, when Shelley called for him, he would drop everything and get to her as fast as possible. "I'm coming, Shelley dear," he would shout. The sound of Ron's anxious and scared voice gave Tori chills. She said, "It was one of the scariest sounds I've ever heard, still." He sounded broke, like he was dying every single time he said it. It was like Shelly dear was the last thing he would ever say in his life. And even through all of her torture and abuse routines, Shelly still found a new use for Ron. She enlisted him to help care for a Pearl Harbor survivor named James Mac McClintock, a family friend of Kathy Loreno's mother. Shelly talked up Mac like he was the father she never had. She cared for him, and Mac loved Shelly back. She called several times a day to make sure he was okay, and Tori had come to look at Mac as a grandfather figure. She loved going to his house to spend time with him. On more than one occasion, Mac told Shelly that he wanted her to move in with him. Instead, however, Shelly moved Ron into Mac's house. At first, Mac was concerned about the fact that Ron was gay. He was uncomfortable with Ron bathing him and taking care of his personal needs. However, in time, Ron and Mac worked things out, and Ron spent most days at Mac's house. He would even spend the night sometimes. And while there were open bedrooms in Mac's house, Tori noticed that Ron wasn't using any of them. Exploring the house, Tori finally found Ron's few personal items and some blankets in a small storage area in the cold, wet basement. Tori immediately knew that her mom was making him sleep down there. Even away from Shelly's house, she still held all the cards. Lara Watson hit the roof when she found out through Sami that Shelly was caring for an elderly man named Mac. She called Deputy Bergstrom at the Pacific County Sheriff's Office and asked about the Kathy Loreno case, and Bergstrom told her that the case had gone cold, that he was working on another big trial, and that he would keep working on the case when he had time. Lara called the local police chief, Dale Scobert, who urged her to let the Pacific County authorities have a chance to build a case. On September 7, 2001, Mac assigned Shelly a power of attorney. He had changed his will to leave his entire estate to his black lab named Sissy. But after Sissy died, everything was left to Shelly. Shelly's abuse of Ron while in her house was only escalating. Tori woke in the middle of the night to Shelly screaming. She silently crept down the stairs and saw Ron standing out on the porch, almost naked, with Shelly standing in front of him yelling at him and making him punch himself in the face over and over. Shelly held up a cup that was obviously full of urine. "What is this, Ron?" she screamed. Ron told her that he needed to use the restroom, but he didn't want to wake her. That was the rule after all. "Drink it," she said, and handed the cup to Ron. He put the cup to his lips and drank the entire glass without a pause. If Shelly said to do it, you just did it. While Shelly decided to move Ron into Mac's house for around-the-clock care, Tori felt that maybe he would be a bit safer there. On February 9th, 2002, Shelly called Tori while she was getting ready for a football game at Willapa Valley High and told her that Mac was in the hospital. He had fallen and was hurt bad. Shelly picked her up, and Tori remembers her acting very anxious at the time. Shelly said she didn't know if Mac would live, and then she said Ron was there when it happened. By the time they made it to the hospital, the nursing staff informed them that Mac had indeed passed away. Tori burst into tears and melted into her mother's arms. Shelly didn't seem broken up at all. Actually, she was nearly giddy. Shelly had been left $5,000. There was the matter of his dog Sissy, but she was old and wouldn't live much longer. Then Shelly would inherit Mac's house, worth more than $140,000. How Mac had died was a bit of a mystery. He died of blunt force trauma to his head from a fall. Ultimately, nothing further was investigated. Once Ron was back working in the yard at Shelley's Monaghan Landing house, Tori heard her mother's new line of abuse for her Uncle Ron. "You killed Mac. You're a murderer," Shelley would scream at him. And this went on and on and on, until one day it happened. "You're right," Ron said. "I killed him. Please don't tell." And Shelley was ready to twist the knife. "Don't disappoint me, Ron. Don't you ever. I don't want to tell, but you need to know you disgust me. You're a murderer." In May of 2002, Sami snuck down to Sandy, Oregon to attend Nikki's wedding at Lara's wedding venue. Nikki had found a great man and was living a life that was impossible to imagine when she was growing up, when she was forced to wallow, when she was told she'd never be anything, that no one would ever love her. And Sami understood why Nikki had not invited her tormentor to her wedding. Even so, she wore a special ring on her finger that contained Nikki, Tori, and her own birthstones within it. It was a gift she would give to Shelley the following day, for Mother's Day. The ring was another small secret in a family that had kept and buried countless secrets. By wearing the ring at the wedding, it in some way made Sami feel like her mom was at the wedding as well. In the spring of 2003, Pacific County Sheriff's Deputy Jim Bergstrom attempted to serve Ron with a restraining order brought forth by his mother. The deputy saw Ron on the porch as he pulled into the driveway. Ron, now a thin, spiderly figure, shot the deputy a startled look and ran through a hole in the fence and into the woods of the backyard. The deputy knocked on the door, but no one answered. 15 minutes later, the dispatcher took a call from Shelley asking for the deputy to meet her in front of the post office. "He's not living with us now," Shelley lied. "He's in Tacoma." The deputy shot back at her. "I don't appreciate being lied to. I saw him at your place. He ran away. I know he was there." Shelley, always quick with a comeback, said that he probably ran away because there were warrants out for him. She told the officer that he was sick and that she had been taking care of him. She promised to have Ron call, but before she could escape the conversation with the deputy, he asked her about one more thing. He wanted to know about Kathy Loreno. Her family was still worried and had even paid a private detective to try to find her. Shelley replied that she hadn't heard from her in a long time. In fact, no one had. That night, Shelley quizzed Tori for the first time in a long time about Kathy. Boyfriend's name, Rocky. His job, trucker. Yet, all the preparations in the world couldn't have prepared Shelley for what would happen next. On April 19th, 2003, Shelley opened a letter postmarked from Olympia, and suddenly she turned white as a sheet, and her hands started to shake as she read the letter. "The gunshots you heard last night were from Kathy. Like the Lord Jesus Christ, she also rose from the dead and is back to revenge you, ashes to ashes." Shelley repeatedly asked Tori over the next few days if anyone had approached her about Kathy. Tori kept telling her no, and she didn't understand her mom's over-the-top concern. Kathy, whom Tori could barely remember, wasn't dead. She had run off with her boyfriend. She was living a happy life. Because remember, Tori still only knows her mother's lies about Kathy. Next, Shelley called Sami at her teaching job. Sami's supervisor pulled her to the side to tell her that her mother was on the phone. It had become habit for Sami to pre-warn any new supervisors about her mother's antics, knowing Shelley would not give up calling until she got her way. Sami got on the phone, and Shelley was frantic. "Kathy, has anyone asked you about Kathy?" she asked Sami. and Sami told her no, and Shelly told her about the letter. The letter scared Sami because it meant that someone outside of the family knew something. Sami hung up and thought about the necklace Kathy had given to her on her birthday. She thought of how Kathy always had time for the girls when they were growing up, doing their hair, making them laugh with a story. She could think of millions of good things about Kathy. And that is when Sami decided that Kathy's family needed to know what had really happened. Tori spied on her mother and father one weekend when Dave had come home from work. They were outside with Ron, who had fallen off the roof while trying to clean the shingles. He was crumpled up like a ball on the ground, and Dave and Shelly just stood there, not rendering aid, but telling him to get up and do it again, which he did. Shelly would also make Ron stand on the porch railing, barefoot, with his feet already bleeding, and she would make him jump from the railing to the rough and jagged gravel driveway, over and over. Even in his declining health, Shelly never let Ron wear shoes, not even while working outside. And when his feet were a gnarly mess of blood and pus, Shelly would boil a pot of water and then add bleach, and then force Ron to soak his miserable feet. Tori said it was the worst thing she had ever smelled, a combination of bleach and decomposing flesh. One time, Shelly made the water too hot, and the skin began to slough off of his muscle. Shelly bandaged his feet after this incident, and Ron was allowed to sleep in the laundry room floor again. By this time, Shelly was ready to get rid of the troublesome Ron. So she called Dave and told him that she was going to take Ron to a homeless shelter, but Dave would have nothing of that. He didn't care for Ron, but also did not think the shelter was the best idea. The next morning, when Tori woke up, she did not see any signs of Ron anywhere. When she asked her mother where he was, she told Tori that she had taken Ron to stay at Mac's house for a while. Tori's room was just above the noisy gravel driveway, and no one could sneak in or out without making a distinctive loud crunching noise. Knowing a lie when she heard one, Tori simply replied, "I didn't hear you leave, I guess." Ron had been gone a few days before Tori asked about him again. Shelly told her that he was at Mac's house and that he was fine. She said that she saw him twice a day, and she went over every day at 7 a.m. to check on him. Tori knew that was a lie. Her mother didn't get up that early for anyone. But then Shelly turned back on the lovey-doveyness towards Tori. She told her to remember the story if anyone came asking about Ron. She was to say he left and was living in Tacoma now, to which Tori agreed. She had no choice. But she persisted in asking to go see Ron until Shelly finally snapped. Shelly insisted that Tori now do all of the chores that Ron had been doing: weeding, feeding the animals, organizing the kitchen, whatever had to be done, and to Shelly's meticulous specifications at that. When Tori didn't clean the dog's kennel to Shelly's standards, she told Tori to crawl inside, and when she did, Shelly locked the cage. "That'll teach you," Shelly balked. "How does it feel to be treated like your precious puppy, you stupid asshole? You think a dog likes lying in its shit?" And then Shelly turned on the hose, soaking Tori with water muddled with dog feces. Sami was pleased when her mom called and said she had decided to allow Tori to go spend a few days with her sister in Seattle. It was the first time this had ever happened. They met in Olympia, a good halfway point for both parties, and had dinner. Sami could tell her mother was a mess. Her hair was frazzled, and her thumb was swollen to double its size. She may have also lost a couple of teeth, but Sami could not tell for sure. On the drive to Seattle, Sami had 2 surprises for her little sister. First, you're going to try sushi for the very first time. Second, we're going to see Nikki tomorrow. All of a sudden, Tori was panic-stricken. She was not only terrified of seeing her sister for the first time in 7 years, but she also didn't want to defy her mother. When the 3 sisters gathered at Duke's Seafood and Chowder House in Seattle's Lake Union the next day, it was, for Tori, like experiencing the most amazing women she had ever met. Nikki was now 28, all grown up, beautiful and poised. She even smelled wonderful. No one talked about how terrible their mother was during this meal, or how misguided their father had been. They all just reveled in this moment of reconnection and reunion. On July 22nd, 2003, Dave's phone rang. It was Shelley. Not normal Shelley, not demanding Shelley. This Shelley spoke in a halting, weary voice. She told him that he needed to come home, that there was something bad going on with Ron. Dave had been home the previous Sunday, and he'd seen Ron recovering from what Shelley insisted had been a fall from a tree. His finger had been broken in the fall. Dave also recalled that Ron's feet were bandaged. There were burns on his head and chest, which Shelley claimed came from burning bushes in the yard. There were bruises, too. Lots of bruises. Again, all from accidents, Shelley claimed. Dave had tried to get Ron to leave the house, offering him $270 in cash just to leave town. But Ron said he would hurt or kill himself if he had to leave Shelley. Dave was already in hot water with his boss, and he told Shelley he couldn't make it home until Friday, which seemed forever away. During this early morning call, Shelley never told Dave that Ron was dead, but he already knew. Shelley claimed to have just found him on the back porch, already dead. She insisted that she had tried to revive him, but to no use. So she had dragged his body down to the pole shed, dressed him in clean sweatpants, something she would never let him wear while alive, and put his body in a couple of sleeping bags. Next, Shelley moved all of the camping gear from atop the freezer, opened the lid, and placed Ron's body inside. She then meticulously placed all of the camping gear back on top, so no one, especially Tori, would notice. After this is when she made her first call to Dave on that early morning. When the weekend came and Dave came home, he was hopeless in his thoughts. He couldn't believe that he was having to dispose of another body. And as he struggled to get Ron's frozen body out of the freezer, Shelley was right there watching. "I tried to save him," she claimed. "I did CPR, but it didn't work. He was too weak. They're going to think we did some kind of abuse on Ron. The police will point fingers at us," she lamented. Dave carried Ron's body deep into the backyard. There was currently a burn ban in place, so he could not cremate Ron as he had done with Kathy. So he buried him in a shallow grave, which he attempted to make look natural. He then hid his tools for this burial at Mac's house. Tori, Sami, and Nikki were finally starting to come down from their high, brought on by their long overdue reunion. Sami was talking to Tori, making sure that she knew that she had to keep seeing Nikki as a secret from her mother. Tori was nervous and not sure she could keep it a secret. Just then, Sami asked Tori if their mother did things to Tori. Tori just looked at Sami, who was already crumbling in front of her little sister, and gave her the list of the horrid, terrible things that their mother had been doing to her. Sami hugged her sister and asked why hadn't she ever told her. Every time Sami asked about Tori's home life, she said it had been fine. But what Sami didn't know was just how shielded Tori had been from the life Sami, Nikki, Shane, and Kathy had lived under their mother. "I thought you and Nikki had a happy childhood," Tori said. The sisters kept talking and got into the Ron situation happening at the house, and Sami knew she had to reveal a secret to Tori. She could barely speak the words out loud to her little sister. Mom killed Kathy. They burned her body in the backyard. Dave and Shelley spent the evening coming up with yet another cover story. Ron had always wanted to go to San Diego, so they gave him some money, and Dave drove him to Olympia to catch a bus. Yes, this would work. But if it didn't, Ron had always been suicidal. Well, they had two options. Sami and Tori sat up talking the entire night, being open and honest with each other, giving one another a blow-by-blow incident report. If it had happened to Sami, it was now happening to Tori. Then Sami asked for the truth about Ron. Tori didn't need to say anything. Just with her eyes, she said it all. "I think Ron is dead, and I think our mother did something to him." Sami pulled herself together and said, "We need to tell Nikki." The call came at an hour when people only call with the most dire news, and Nikki answered the phone. It was Sami. "We have to get Tori out of there," she said. Sami recounted Tori and her conversation about Ron. But Nikki was in a different place in her life than where she was 2 years ago when she had gone to the police. And they didn't do anything back then either. They broached the subject of Shane, which they had only spoken about in whispers before. Sami then went back to Tori. "We need to figure out what is best," she told her little sister. "Do you think you can give us some time and wait this out? You'll be 18 in 4 years." Tori cried in her sister's arms. She wanted to do what was best for everyone, but she was filled with anger, and she knew her mother needed to be stopped. "I can't do this anymore, Sami," Tori said. Sami held her sister. She was desperate. She knew that everyone's lives would go up in flames if the truth ever came out. Even so, she'd found a way to navigate her mother's treachery, and she hoped Tori could do the same. Shelley met Tori and Sami at the same Olive Garden parking lot in Olympia where she had dropped her off before. Tori just sat in the car for the whole ride, telling her mother she had a headache and pretended to sleep. When they arrived at the house on Monahan Landing, the house already felt foreign to Tori. "Ron got a job," Shelley proclaimed. "No, he didn't. Ron's dead," Tori thought. Shelley started to grow suspicious of her daughter's silence since returning home. When Shelley asked her if she was all right, Tori said she didn't feel well and was getting a runny nose. Shelley was not fooled, but she was willing to play the fool. She gave Tori a cool look and said, "Oh, I have something that can help with that." She disappeared and came back with a couple of tablets. "Take these," she said. Tori called Nikki later that night and told her about the interaction with her mother and the pills. "What? What did she offer you?" "Some pills." "What kind of pills?" "Yellow ones for my nose." "You need to throw those up right now, Tori," Sami exclaimed. Tori balked back at Sami. "Mom wouldn't hurt me." To which Sami replied, "You don't know her, Tori. You need to get out of that house right now." But Tori was afraid to throw up, afraid that her mother would hear her and ask questions. She had only taken one of the 2 pills to begin with, but then she started to feel groggy. She called Sami back. "Get me out of here. I can't find Ron. He's dead, Sami. I know it." "Are you sure you can't do this a couple more years?" Sami asked. "No, I fucking can't, Sami. Mom's a killer. She'll know. She'll probably kill me too. You know what she's capable of." "Okay," Sami said. "We'll get you out." On August 6th, 2003, Nikki and Sami drove down to Pacific County to tell the sheriff what they knew to be true. With tears and long pauses to work up courage for what they needed to say, the Knotek sisters gave their story, the same one Nikki had told before. But this time was different, because this time they were believed. Others from the prosecutor's office and law enforcement came in and out of the interview room. Deputy Bergstrom and the prosecutor's staff recorded everything that they said. Then Nikki looked Bergstrom directly in the eye and said, "If Ron is dead, you could have stopped it." Bergstrom did not reply. After their meeting, they got back into the car and started the long drive back to Seattle. That night, Nikki tossed and turned. Sleep avoided her, so she called the one true ally in her life, Lara. When she couldn't get her on the phone, she sent her an email. "You need to call me. I was in Raymond until 11 a.m. last night. CPS is taking Tori out of the house this morning at 8. Mother and Dave did something very bad again. I was with Pacific County prosecutor and Sami came with me too." Tori was only 14, but she was strong. While waiting the next day for her parents to get arrested, she called Sami again and again. She was getting nervous because nothing was happening. Life was just continuing as normal. But Tori had also prepared for authorities to comb through the house for evidence. She wrote them a note on white and pink-lined paper, stating, "Dear FBI, police, etc. Please don't ruin all of my things when you're investigating. Nothing of interest in here anyways. Please leave all of my personal belongings alone. Please find the animals good homes." When the knock came the next morning, Tori was already standing by the door. She didn't open it immediately because she didn't want her mom to see how excited she was. The deputy and CPS were there to take Tori for suspected child abuse. Tori went upstairs to pack with an officer, to which she said, "You need to get a search warrant and come back. In the poll building, there's a bunch of Ron's stuff. I'm pretty sure my parents are going to burn all of it. I put some stuff in the chicken coop just to hide it." But when Tori told the Pacific County investigators her story, she minimalized most of what had happened to her. She told of what happened to Ron as well. She was careful of what she said because, in her mind, there is always a chance that she would be released back to her mother. She later said that she only told about 10% of what had happened to her. Investigators, however, understood that 10% of a nightmare was still a nightmare. The call Sami had been dreading was happening. She stared at her mother's phone number on the phone for a moment, and she considered letting it go to voicemail. When she answered, Shelley launched into what had just happened. "I've never even laid a hand on her. I don't think I've ever even grounded the girl. And every time I did, I would take it back, Shelley claimed. Tori had spoken to police. So had Nikki and Sami. Lara had also called the deputy and spoke for 2 hours about what she knew, but none of these statements led to an arrest. But Dave Knotek took care of that all by himself. He went to the sheriff's office. Dave was tired. Dave was beaten down. And Dave was nervous too. When investigators asked him if he would consent to an interview, Dave could not think of a reason not to. He had never hurt Tori, and neither had his wife, he thought. But as it turned out, they didn't want to talk to Dave about Tori. They wanted to talk about Kathy and Ron. Dave stayed firm to the story that he and Shelley had done nothing wrong. But then little pieces started to crack away, and Dave began to cry. He asked to use the restroom. The investigators agreed, and one of them followed him down the hall. Just outside of the bathroom, Dave broke down and told the officer where Ron was buried and where Kathy's remains had been scattered after her body had been burned in the fire pit. Deputies picked up Shelley at Mac's house. She was confused, indignant. She couldn't understand why anyone would think that she had done anything wrong. Nikki cried when she got the news that her parents had been arrested. Her dad had admitted to disposing of Kathy and Ron's bodies, but nothing else. And he hadn't pointed a finger at Shelley, and for her part, Shelley kept her mouth clamped shut. There was a tragic irony to the date. It was Kathy Loreno's birthday. Missing for a decade, the woman who told the Knotek girls not to help her out of fear that something would happen to them would have been 45 on that day. Nikki sent an email to her grandmother. The police are going to search the house and property today. Cross your fingers, they find stuff. But I think the confession from Dave on disposing of the bodies might be enough along with our statements. We all have to remember that Mother is pretty smart, and she manages to weasel her way out of a lot of things. I hope this won't be one of them. As the whirlpool of truth began to pull Shelley and Dave downward, there was the matter of the other person who had vanished into the night, Shane. On the day after her parents' arrest, Sami and her boyfriend went out for a steak dinner to celebrate her 25th birthday, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Newspapers and TV had been rife with stories about her parents. Talk of abuse, death unfolding in rural Raymond. Raymond couple befriends 3 strangers who then disappeared. It seems as if what was happening in Raymond was sucking all of the oxygen out of Sami's birthday celebration. They left the restaurant, and as they drove through Tacoma, Sami's cell phone rang. It was Lara. "Shane is dead," Lara said in a shattered voice. "Dave confessed to killing him." Sami dropped the phone and started screaming. Later, Sami would say that she looked for Shane through the years, in crowds, on the street, anywhere. "Shane's in the ocean," Dave said. Standing on the edge of the field as criminalists and dogs scoured the property, Dave told investigators a story of Shane being out in the pole building, and when Dave found him there, he was messing around with one of Dave's rifles. Dave had told him explicitly that he was not allowed to touch the guns, and as Dave and Shane argued about the gun, and then Dave tried to physically take it from Shane, it had gone off. He said he'd been too scared to report the accident, if that is indeed what it had been. Nikki remembered when Shane had secretly talked to her out in the pole shed. He had found pictures of Kathy, Polaroid pictures that Shelley had taken. Kathy was on the ground crawling, covered in bruises. Shane showed them to Nikki and then made a plan to go to the police with the pictures and save Kathy. But for some reason, possibly survival instincts, Nikki went to her mother and told her that Shane had pictures of Kathy. Shelley flew into a rage. She spent the next few weeks constantly telling Dave that they needed to get rid of Shane, that he was going to tell. Eventually, one night, Dave walked out to the pole building with his .22, and he opened the door and fired one shot directly into the back of Shane's head. He walked back to the house and told Shelley what he had done. "I killed Shane," he said. In typical Shelley fashion, she responded, "You did what? You killed our nephew? Why?" Dave didn't know what to make of Shelley. This is what she had begged him, harassed him, cajoled him into doing, nearly since the day Kathy had died. The next morning, the girls awoke to Shelley's story with the birdhouse and the note. Shane had run away to Alaska to fish. Dave burned the body as soon as the girls were away. But this time, he didn't use extra accelerants like he did with Kathy. He just kept putting more and more wood onto the fire until his nephew's body vanished into ash and bone. When the ashes were cool enough, Dave collected them and drove them out to Washaway Beach, and he dumped Shane's ashes into the white, foaming surf of the Pacific Ocean. Nikki and Sami stayed in constant contact after their parents' arrest, avoiding TV when they could. The media had dubbed it the Raymond Torture Killings. Nikki, Sami, and Tori never said a word to the media, a pact that they made with each other. Shelley and Dave were held on multi-million-dollar bonds and faced charges from murder to concealing a death. It had only taken Sami 2 weeks to get guardianship of Tori. Sami, who was then living in a one-bedroom apartment off Greenwood Avenue in Seattle, made arrangements to get a 2-bedroom apartment. She felt good about the opportunity to give her sister a fresh start away from their parents. In February 2004, 6 months after his arrest, Dave Knotek pleaded down his first-degree murder charge for killing Shane Watson to second-degree murder and pled guilty to unlawful disposal of human remains and rendering criminal assistance. He was sentenced to just under 15 years in prison. 10 months after Shelley's arrest, she entered an Alford plea of guilty to the charges. An Alford plea can be rather perplexing. It's a plea that allows the defendant to plead guilty, yet assert innocence at the same time. The Alford plea, unlike many plea bargains, didn't require Shelley to tell the court what she had done. She was sentenced to 17 years. At her sentencing hearing 2 months after her trial, Shelley Knotek looked beat down. Her hair was scraggly, and her clairol red hair long faded into a mix of gray and reddish blonde. Her jail-issued orange jumpsuit hung loosely from her frame. No one from her family showed up to support her. Shelley's statement at her sentencing was as follows: "In this jail and in this courtroom and in this community and everywhere else, I'm known as some kind of horrible monster. I'm not. I've made such horrible mistakes, though. Kathy was my friend. She had value and she had a purpose. She would have been there for me. I wasn't there for her a lot. I was not there when Kathy died. Not there for her. I believe I am not guilty of murder, of deliberately causing her death. But a mother is the most responsible for her home environment. She was mistreated in my home and now she's gone. I'll never get over it, and I don't deserve to. Shelley continued to point a finger at Nikki and Shane as Kathy's abusers. None of it was her fault. Not Kathy, not Ron, not Shane, not Mac. Shelley was shocked when her words didn't have the desired effect on the sentencing judge. In fact, instead of sympathizing with Shelley, the judge added 5 additional years to her sentence for a total of 22 years in prison. For a woman who lived to control others, who reveled in telling people what to do and how to do it, it was a fitting justice. Shelley Knotek wouldn't be in charge of anyone or anything for more than 2 decades. Dave Knotek was released from prison in 2016. He lives on the Washington coast, working for a seafood processing plant. He's thin, and he struggles being on his feet all day. The only thing that keeps him going is his relationship with Tori and Sami. Nikki refuses to see him, which he understands. Nikki can neither forgive nor forget. She can only move on, raising her children in a way that her mother would never understand, with love and respect. Her heart remains heavy and full of regret for her part in what happened to Shane and Kathy. Shelley Knotek will be released from prison this year, in 2022. She'll be 68 years old. She maintains that her conviction was a mistake, claiming she misunderstood the Alford plea. None of her daughters have ever visited her, though a visitor to the woman's prison in Gig Harbor, Washington, stated that Shelley's hair is now white and that she is fighting cancer. At least, that's what Shelley says. Tori finds moments of nostalgia for her mother, a mother she once loved. She doesn't miss Shelley at all, but she does miss having a mom, a role that her sisters were able to fill. The Knotek sisters gather together several times a year, mostly at Nikki's place in Seattle. Nikki returned to Raymond in 2018 for the first time since the case broke. It was hard, but Sami was there as Nikki revisited memories of their mother. She remembered a few times when her mom was kind and attentive even. Those good memories brought tears. Sami also returned to the Louderback and Monaghan Landing houses for the first time that fall. She had a visceral reaction to the bathroom at Louderback and the place where Nikki had been made to wallow. Tears came. Smiles too. She pointed out a fish pond that her boyfriend had made and the spot where he'd parked his car to drop her off, honk, and flash his lights until Shelley gave up and let her inside. The sisters text and talk all of the time. They see the insanity of the things that their parents did, the horror of what happened while they were growing up. While Shelley may have sought to keep them apart, to control them forever, she underestimated the strength of their bond. Sisters forever, and victims no more. The Secret Sits podcast is researched and written by me, John Dodson. Audio engineering by Gabriel Dodson. Original logo artwork provided by Tony Lay.